Welcome to the Raisina Ideas Pod. My name is Lukhanyo Neer, Chief Operating Officer of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation in South Africa. Joining me today are two exceptional voices, Dr. Comfort Ero, President and CEO of the International Crisis Group, Prime Minister Moussa Mara, former Prime Minister of Mali. Welcome to you both. Let's dive in.
Thank you.
The international system, as we know it, is fraying at its edges. Africa once again finds itself at the intersection of competition between global and regional powers, seeking strategic advantages in essential minerals and resources. Against this backdrop, violent conflicts persist in regions like the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and the Gulf and the Great Lakes. Conflicts that receive limited attention internationally, yet carry profound implications not just for the African continent and its stability, but for global peace and global stability as well. Comfort, I'll start with you. The Horn of Africa, the Sahel, and the Great Lakes are distinct in their histories, yet they share a common thread of external interference and weak state capacity. Which of these regions do you see as the most urgent flashpoint right now?
They're all urgent, quite frankly. I mean, given the scale of human suffering, the transnational nature of the conflicts, these are effectively internationalized civil wars. And I want to go back to what you said at the opening about where Africa as a continent is located in the international sort of geopolitical landscape. And what is very clear to us is that unlike 20 years ago, for example, where Sudan was at the top of the agenda, these conflicts are deprioritized. It's clear also that regions also have to start taking care of themselves first, because the usual the usual arbiters of these conflicts, Washington, London, Paris, are no longer have the bandwidth to take care of these crises. And the multilateral architecture that we have on the continent, both in the apex of the African Union or regional bodies, really need to start taking seriously conflict resolution in all its scales, whether it's averting, de-escalating, or actually managing the conflicts as well. Because these are three quite seismic conflicts in three of Africa's, out of the 5 regions on the continent, 3 of them are in crisis. And we cannot overstate how severe the situation is today.
And why do we keep missing the warning signs? These are conflicts that keep restarting and over and over.
It's not about the warning signs, it's about political will. It's about deciding that these are crises that you need to deal with straight away rather than rush into peacekeeping. It's the art of peacemaking and preventative diplomacy. All the regional architectures, and I'm going to single out ECOWAS, the West Africa one, because it is the poster child of everything that we're seeing around the continent. It was the one that took the novel decision, you'll remember, Prime Minister, took the novel decision of saying that for us to really deal with economic integration, we have to deal with security first. And what we're seeing right now is a reversal of fortunes in that architecture that ECOWAS built around peace and security as well. So I think what worries me also is that most of the time these instruments, the multilateral nature of these bodies on the continent itself is in trouble, is in crisis, and is not able to respond in time, even though they've got all the information at their fingertips as well.
Sure. Prime Minister, the Sahel region continues to witness these unconstitutional transfers of power and violent extremism, yet global responses remain inconsistent. Even continental responses are inconsistent as well. Why does the Sahel remain misunderstood, and what kind of global action is required to get a hand of what's happening at the moment?
I don't think Sahel is misunderstood. I think we have some huge crises over the world, and the challenge in Sahel is not squared for the global players, and that's why we look like maybe put aside of the different light in the international landscape. In this case, in this environment, we have to try to find the solution on our own, by ourselves. And the regional body, like ECOWAS and the African Union, they have a huge challenge to find the right way to solve the African problem. This is a great deal, but it is not impossible. It is not impossible. The first is the political will. The second is our ability to organize ourselves, to put our strength together, and to deal with the root causes of what we face. And as I regularly say, the problem in our country is not a question of international player. It is a question of internal weakness. The failure of our states and the inability of our states to find the answer to the question posed by the societies. We have to deal with, and I am sure it is possible.
Two-part follow-up, Prime Minister. The leaders themselves, particularly the military leaders, do you see them showing the kind of political will you're suggesting? One. Secondly, ECOWAS has also been very inconsistent. At one part they're suspending, at next part they're withdrawing the suspension. The countries have now left or are leaving ECOWAS. What's the state of political will at the moment?
The problem of the militaries is they are not fit to lead the country, seriously, profoundly. And they do not understand the substance of our countries and our crisis. They answer military by using force, by using weapons. This is the only thing they know, and this is the only way they will go. And it is not enough to solve this kind of problem by only military ways. This is the problem of the militaries. That's why we have to talk to them and to try to convince them, even to put a pressure on them by using the society means, the civil society organization, in order to obtain their withdrawal from the leadership. This is what we have to do. They are not able to find the right solution to Sahelian and other parts of Africa.
Prime Minister, I know, and I'm agreed with you, that the external actors aren't as significant as the media and outsiders seem to think. But let's look at them briefly. The state of the world at the moment is really being driven by this idea of mineral diplomacy that you see primarily out of the US at the moment, but has really been driven by the Chinese and middle powers equally over the last number of years as well. From your perspective, how do these external interests and ambitions for resources shape or influence the kind of conflicts you're seeing across the continent, but also in the Sahel in particular as well?
I am sure if the state is weak, if the state is not solid institution, this kind of external impact will be huge. And even on this way, we need to build a solid institution, democratic ones, a state able to solve its own problem. That will ease the mineral deal if it comes to a question of deal. I am not against the deal. I think we should focus on our interests and work with whoever wants to work with us. If we can solve the problem by making some deal about the resources, yes. But the substance should be state, strength of state, strength of our institution, and our ability to understand our interests, short-term, middle-term, and the long-term interests.
Dr. Comfort, let me bring you in here. This idea of this new scramble for the continent is really interesting when you think about the initial scramble in the late 1800s. What's the risk that the scramble turns dormant conflicts into active proxy wars? And where do you see that playing out most tangibly at the moment?
When hasn't there been a scramble for resources on the continent?
But doesn't it feel more acute at the moment in the same way you're saying in the bigger discussion?
You know, we were saying 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there's been a scramble for resources. You know, when I look back to when I started sort of, you know, working across the continent, one of the first two conflicts or three conflicts that I was engaged in, Angola, Sierra Leone and Liberia. Sure. And what was the heart of the matter? Diamonds and timber. So these were drivers and things that fueled conflict both internally when the distribution of the cake is not large enough so that everybody can eat from the cake, and also because of external factors. But it goes back to what you were saying, Prime Minister, as well. When you don't have a consolidation of the state, when you don't have key principles, when you don't have the governance structure, the economic governance structure, so that you ensure that the revenue that's collected is used wisely across the country to enable people, then you fuel grievance, you fuel illicit activities as well. But you're also right to acknowledge the resource dimension of conflicts. I mean, look at what's happening in the Great Lakes now. So President Tshisekedi looks with interest with the mineral diplomacy that you talked about in Ukraine. He says, well, America, come and buy my minerals, because what do we have? We're the richest country when it comes to copper and cobalt, which is used for a lot of the telephones that we're using. Europe's interest, among other things, in the Democratic Republic of Congo today is access to those minerals, access to using these materials, because they're very important back to their industries as well. China is playing a very long game as well in setting up its stall in these countries. One of the reasons why also we're seeing this rush to annex the eastern part of Congo also is not just because of national interest tied to Rwanda's long-standing national security concerns, but it's also an interest in access to those raw materials as well. So there are external forces at play as well, but they also intersect with the fact that you've got a very weak centre of gravity that doesn't have a good governance architecture to address those needs. So those two things do collide in the way the Prime Minister was suggesting.
Sure. Let's look at just briefly at the global order, and then we'll come back to the continent. Comfort, when the US withdraws from the global order, at least appears to be withdrawing, the West is going to become increasingly distracted, as I think we were seeing in the panel you were both on. The entire discussion around waging peace was largely focused on Europe and the Middle East. So we must imagine that the West is going to be distracted. How does the vacuum affect peacekeeping and conflict mediation on the continent? What do you anticipate might happen increasingly?
Let me say one thing about this notion that the United States is withdrawing. I don't think it's withdrawing. I think it's redefining its own relationship with a number of countries, a number of regions as well. I think it also wants to negotiate the terms of its continuing engagement. And I mean, well, if you put yourself in the position of President Trump, he feels as that there have been free riders. And in fact, it was President Obama who talked about the freeloading as free riders as well. So this is a United States that wants to negotiate the terms of the very structure that it created as well, which it has benefited it as well. And you're right, you're also right, and I think this is what's very worrying for the continent, is that because other countries, your traditional allies themselves are distracted, they've got other priorities as well. You're right that, you know, the question is who steps in to fill that vacuum. Well, China is a reluctant superpower. It doesn't necessarily, or it's not ready to step into that place. You've got other countries that seek to disrupt it, some of or players who seek to dismantle it because it hasn't worked in their favour and it doesn't serve their interests as well. The question, I think, for us on the continent is whether our institutions and our leaders are willing and ready and able and prepared to step in. Because you can't continue to play lip service to this notion of African solutions for African problems and not take the responsibility. You can't also insist that you have a seat at the table and not make sure it accompanies, you accompany that with a more responsible posture as well. But also, I would say one more final thing is that the conflicts that we're dealing with, whether it's the Sahel or the Great Lakes or Sudan, they're not primarily Africa's own responsibility. It's true that proximity matters and the region that's closest to it, the countries that are closest to it, are Africans, but these are international crises in nature and have significant global ramifications, you talked about peacekeeping. And for that reason, we cannot conclude with the suggestion that this is Africa's to take care of, because they do have grave internationalized consequences as well.
Sure. Prime Minister, I'm happy to align with the way Comfort is framing around the redefining of multilateralism. With that in mind, what does this redefining of multilateralism, or rather, where does it leave African states? Where they think about, are they more vulnerable, or does it mean that if they're freer to chart their own path? Particularly if you think about these various conflicts, when at the moment, if there's a retreat by the West, does that open an opportunity for us actively now to shape our own path?
You are right, but if we want to take advantage on this situation and to have a better place in the multilateral issues, we should unify Africa.
Sure.
The key word for Africa is unity. If you look at the vote in the United Nations, the last vote, for example, about Ukraine in the General Assembly, you see African country going in a different way. Some vote for, some against, some abstain. As long as we are on this kind of field, Africa will never have a great voice on the multilateral landscape. We have an opportunity now. Now it is an opportunity. But the key to get this opportunity done in our benefit is union.
Sure.
You should have one voice, and especially on the key issues, climate issue, reform of the United Nations issues. The key issue, Africa should speak with only one voice. And this is really a challenge.
I mean, I agree with you, Prime Minister, that it's important that there's a sense of unity. I think it's difficult to get 54 countries and a system that's based on intergovernmentalism to speak with one voice. And Europe doesn't speak with one voice. I think we should acknowledge that. ASEAN also, because of the neighborhood that it finds itself in, cannot speak with one voice. I think what's key is that there's a clear strategic direction as well. I think what's key also is to make sure, for a good example, is that when the African Union or regions call a summit, that you go to those summits as well, and that you pay your dues as well to what is seen by many people as a permanent multilateral organizations. And we always say, don't we, Prime Minister, that outsiders can't love our institutions more than we do. And there's a sense in which external actors pay more homage to the African Union than its member states. And I think is a real concern.
Fortunately, we've had the part of the discussion I wanted us to have around the African Union, and particularly in light of the new leadership at the Commission. I think the kind of discussion we're having really means that we must have a much bigger discussion about what does this Commission need to do in order to have at least drive us towards the kind of unity we were discussing, the kind of very concerted and coordinated efforts as well. On this point, you'll remember, so that I transition into the next part, you'll remember there was a time in the AU when you had Obasanjo, Bouteflika, Mbeki, and others being able to speak with a very coherent and cohesive voice in order to at least marshal these 54 different nations in a particular direction. And that's the kind of thing that we must go back to. Where's the leadership at today? Let's talk solutions, the last set of questions. The AU's silencing of the guns initiative claims and aims to end conflict by 2030. But cuts to development aid really will widen this gap increasingly. Dr. Ero, what's the one bold step, whether it's local, regional, or international, that could shift the needle toward peace in Africa's forgotten conflicts?
Look, I think you put your nail in it when you're defining the evolution of the African Union and the glorious era that you were pointing to in the early 2000s. You know, you talked about Obasanjo and particular, but also your president, Mbeki as well. And it's that concerted effort that we are taking this seriously, and that we are going to implement our own constitutive act. If the constitutive act of the African Union was fully implemented, it would be a very different moment as well. It was one that shifted from non-indifference, from non-interference, to wanting to take seriously and ensure never again as well. Now that momentum has gone, and it goes back to what you were saying, Prime Minister, that the need to cohere and to take seriously and not just pay lip service to the idea of preventative diplomacy, which the Union was doing very seriously at one point, and it seems to have gone by the wayside.
Prime Minister, let me give you the last word. What does the African Union or member states, what do they need to do to break the cycle of violence that we keep seeing across the continent?
I will end by one word: leadership. If you look at Africa, we are 54. But the key countries should take the leadership. The North, Egypt. West, Nigeria. South Africa. Central parts, we have to discuss.
I was waiting to see what
Eastern part also, maybe Ethiopia or
even some
Kenya.
of those North African countries may dispute your
Yes,
choice.
absolutely. But 5, 6, or 7 countries, if they are together, to put their strength together, they will find a way to drive the others following them. And especially Nigeria.
Yes.
I am really sad when I look at Nigeria totally focused on his own feet.
Correct.
Instead of taking the leadership in West Africa and even in Africa. We have to work on that and to fight to get the golden era, to come back to the golden era with a real leadership.
As a child of Nigeria, I can only agree with your statement.
Prime Minister Mara, Dr. Comfort Ero, thank you very much for joining us at this Raisina Ideas Pod. What's very clear to all of us that addressing Africa's complex conflicts requires strong leadership from the continent, great international action, and renewed commitment to multilateralism. The conversation continues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.